The elevator log recorded 41 stops on a floor the hotel does not have. Every stop between midnight and 3 in the morning. Every door opened and closed on empty concrete. Anchalee found the data during a routine pull. She is the duty manager, and her job is to account for discrepancies. This one did not account. The building panel showed no 7th floor. The numbering skipped from 6 to 8. But the elevator's internal system had been recording arrivals and departures on floor 7 for over a decade, and no one had asked why. Anchalee asked. She asked the general manager. She asked the construction records. She asked the elevator itself. At 1:58 in the morning, alone, it answered. Everything. The floor that was sealed and built over. The 2 men who died on it. The spirit house that was never installed. And what happened the morning after Anchalee wrote their names on a plaque is exactly as she described it to me. The first complaint came in on a Tuesday. A guest on the 4th floor called the desk at 2:15 in the morning to report that the elevator had stopped between floors, or so he thought. He had pressed 4, the car had risen and then paused, not between floors exactly, but at a point that felt between floors. Not quite the smooth deceleration of an arrival, not the shudder of a mechanical fault, just a stop. Then, after several seconds, it had continued. He had arrived at 4 and found his room and gone to sleep. But he was a light sleeper, he said, and the incident had unsettled him. Anchalee logged the call, noted the time, and filed a maintenance request in the morning. The second complaint came 2 days later. A woman on the 6th floor, same window of time, same description, an unscheduled pause, a feeling of being held, then a quiet resumption. The third came on Saturday night. A young man who asked, with the nervous laugh of someone who wanted reassurance, whether the hotel had a known issue with the elevator. She called the elevator company on Monday. The technician came on Wednesday, spent 90 minutes in the shaft and the machine room, tested every system, replaced a contact switch that showed minor wear, and reported that nothing was materially wrong. She thanked him and saw him out and went back to her desk. That evening, she pulled the elevator's internal log from the building management system. The log was a plain text file, time-stamped to the second. Every floor stop recorded. Door open, door close, duration. She had looked at these logs before years ago during a different complaint. They were tedious to read and usually said nothing. She opened the log for the past 5 nights and began scrolling. The stops at floors 1 through 6 and 8 were normal. Guests arriving and departing, the kitchen delivery at 5 a.m., the cleaning carts. She moved through the entries methodically. Then she saw the first one. 02-14-7 stop. Floor 7, duration 47 seconds. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the elevator panel diagram stored in the building's technical files. She had seen it many times. Basement 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, lobby mezzanine, no 7. There had never been a 7. The gap between 6 and 8 on the panel was standard. A fact she had noted and unnoted 100 times without ever questioning it. The way you stopped seeing things that had always been present. She scrolled further. 02-31-55, stop, floor 7, duration 23 seconds. 03-8-14, stop, floor 7, duration 1 minute 12 seconds. She went back through all 5 nights. 41 stops on a floor that did not exist. Always between midnight and 3 in the morning. The durations varied, some as short as 11 seconds, one as long as 4 minutes. The doors, according to the log, opened each time and closed, and the car moved on. Anchalee sat at her desk for a long time without moving. She had worked in this hotel for 11 years. She had done the overnight shift hundreds of times. She had read maintenance reports, incident logs, guest feedback forms, cleaning schedules, The paper record of every ordinary and not ordinarily thing that had happened inside these walls since she joined the staff. She was thorough. It was what she was known for. In 11 years, no one had mentioned the 7th floor. Not the previous duty manager, not the maintenance team, not the general manager, who had been here longer than she had. Not in briefings, not in handover notes, not in the informal way that hotel staff passed around knowledge about the building they lived in for half their waking hours. The gap between 6 and 8 had simply always been there. She saved the log file to her personal drive and closed the terminal. She turned off her desk lamp. The hotel lobby was quiet around her, the night staff moving through their routines at the edges of the light. She looked at the elevator doors across the lobby. Closed. Still, she would need to check older logs. The older logs went back 14 years in the digital system. Anchalee came in 2 hours early on her next day's shift and sat at her desk with the building management terminal and the hotel's incident archive open side by side and began working through them in parallel. She was methodical about it. Elevator log on the left screen, incident records on the right, a notebook open beside her keyboard where she wrote dates in 2 columns. The elevator logs showed floor 7 stops going back to the earliest available record. Not every night, and not always multiple stops. Some weeks showed a single brief stop, others showed nothing at all. But the stops were there, consistent across years, always in the same window, always unaccompanied by any other anomaly in the system. She turned to the incident records. The hotel's incident archive was a running document that duty managers had contributed to since 2005, when the current general manager had standardized the reporting format. It covered the expected range: guest complaints, maintenance issues, minor accidents, the occasional medical call. She scrolled through it looking for anything unusual. The first one appeared in 2007. A guest on the 5th floor, room 512, had not checked out by the noon deadline. The room had been found fully occupied. Personal items on the desk, clothes in the wardrobe, a half-drunk glass of water on the bedside table. No note. The guest was not answering calls. After 2 days, the belongings had been catalogued and placed in storage, and after 6 months, with no contact, they had been discarded. The incident was marked abandoned departure, administrative, no police report on file. Anchalee wrote the date in her notebook. Then she checked the elevator log. That night, 9 stops at floor 7 between 1:40 and 3:20 a.m. She kept going. There was a second in 2009, a third in 2011. The 4th and 5th were in the same year, 2015, 2 months apart. Both marked the same way, both with the belongings discarded on the same timeline. The 6th was 2018, the 7th was 2021. 7 guests, 7 nights with elevated floor 7 activity. 7 rooms cleaned out and closed without a single follow-up call to the authorities. She sat with the notebook open in front of her for a while, looking at the 2 columns of dates she had written. She went to find the general manager. Kun Prayut was in his office reviewing the monthly occupancy figures. He was 58, precise in his movements, the kind of manager who had been in hospitality long enough that his professionalism had become indistinguishable from his personality. He gestured for her to sit. She showed him the notebook. She explained the correlation, the floor 7 stops, the abandoned departures, the absence of any external reporting. She spoke quietly and without exaggeration, the way she presented every operational concern, because that was the kind of duty manager she was. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. His expression was attentive and serious. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the notebook. Then he said, "Let it go, Anchalee." His voice was level. The tone was the tone of a reasonable man giving reasonable advice. But his face, in the few seconds before he had composed it into that expression, had done something else. It had done what faces did when a person heard something they had been hoping for a long time no one would bring to them. "There have been no injuries," he said. "No formal complaints. The building is fully compliant with all safety codes. This is a maintenance anomaly and a coincidence in the records." She looked at him. "If you pursue this," he said more quietly, "it will create problems that are not yours to create." She thanked him and left his office and walked back to the front desk and stood behind it for a moment, looking at the elevator doors. He had known. That was the thing she kept returning to as she stood there. Not suspected, known. His face had been the face of someone who had lived with a piece of knowledge for a very long time and had learned to keep it in a room it did not come out of. She opened her notebook to the list of 7 names. She was not going to let it go. She found Kun Prasit through the Contractors Guild. It took 3 days of phone calls, working backwards through subcontractor records that the original developer's company had archived at a trade association office in Bangkok. She explained that she was researching the building history for a renovation feasibility report. Not entirely untrue, since she had drafted one the previous year. The guild's administrator gave her 2 names of craftsmen who had worked on the Silom project in 1987. One had died in 2014. The other had a phone number listed with a relative in Nonthaburi. Kun Prasit answered on the first call. When she told him which building she was calling about, there was a pause on the line. Not long, not dramatic. The pause of someone who had been waiting with diminishing expectation. For this particular call, he agreed to meet the following afternoon. The coffee shop was 2 streets from the hotel, the kind of place that had been there for decades, and showed it. Wooden stools, a ceiling fan moving at its lowest setting, the smell of condensed milk, and something frying in a back room. Kun Prasit was already seated when she arrived. He was in his 80s, slight, wearing a clean collared shirt, his hands folded on the table, in the way of someone who had spent his life working with them and now held them still out of long habit. He did not order anything. He looked at her when she sat down with the attentive calm of someone who had already decided to tell the truth and was simply waiting to begin. She asked him what he remembered about the construction. He was quiet for a moment. Then he told her. The original design had 7 floors. He described the plans with the specificity of someone who had studied them closely. The floor plates, the service core, the stairwell configuration. He had worked on the 4th and 5th floors, he said. He knew the whole building the way construction workers knew buildings, through the process of making them floor by floor from the ground up. The fire had broken out on the 7th floor in October of 1987. He did not remember the exact date. It was a Thursday night, he thought. 6 workers had been finishing the floor plate formwork. Extra hours. The developer was pushing the schedule. The fire started in the corner where the electrical runs were being roughed in. It moved quickly because the floor was still open framing and sawdust and formwork timber. 2 men did not get out. He said their names quietly and without ceremony. Somchai and Decha. He had known both of them. Somchai had a daughter. Decha was the youngest on the crew. The developer had handled it privately. He did not say this with anger, just with the flat accuracy of someone describing a fact they had long since stopped being surprised by. The deaths were processed through the contractor's insurance. The families given a settlement, and the project was allowed to continue after a brief delay. The 7th floor, what remained of it, the partially built structure, was assessed and found to be compromisable. The developer's engineers determined that the floor could be absorbed into the structural void between floors 6 and 8, sealed off and built over. The floor numbering was adjusted. 6 remained 6. 8 became the floor directly above what had once been under construction. The spirit house had been discussed among the workers. It was understood that one would be placed. But the site was reorganized after the fire, the crew reassigned, the project handed to a different subcontractor for the remaining floors. In the reassignment, the obligation was lost. Kun Prasit looked at the table. No name was written anywhere. No monk came. We told ourselves it would be done later. It was not done. He was quiet for a moment. I have thought about that for 37 years. Anchalee wrote the 2 names in her notebook. Somchai, Decha. She looked at what she had written. 2 names that had been in no record connected to the hotel she had worked in for 11 years. 2 men who had died in a building that had then been built to pretend the floor they died on had never existed. She closed the notebook. She knew what she had to do next, and she knew she was going to do it alone. She had told no one. Not the night receptionist, not the security guard who made his rounds at the top of every hour. She had come in through the staff entrance at 1:45, changed into her work uniform in the locker room, and sat at the empty front desk for 15 minutes, watching the lobby and the elevator doors and the time display on the computer screen. At 1:58, she stood up and crossed the lobby. The elevator doors opened immediately when she pressed the call button, as if it had been waiting at ground level, which the log would later confirm it had been for the past 40 minutes. She stepped in. The interior was the same as it was every day. Brushed steel walls, a smudged mirror on the back panel, the numbered buttons lit softly in a single column. B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. She pressed nothing. The doors closed. For a moment, nothing happened. The elevator sat at ground level with its doors closed and its buttons unlit, and Anchalee stood in the center of the car with her hands at her sides and waited. The ventilation fan made its faint, constant sound. The lobby sounds were gone. Then the elevator rose, smoothly the way it always rose. No hesitation, no mechanical complaint, just the clean upward movement of a car doing what it was built to do. She watched the floor indicator. G. The bar moved. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The car slowed, and then it stopped. There was no 7 on the indicator. The display showed 6, unchanged. The way a display showed a number when the system had no higher designation available. But the car had stopped above the 6th floor. She could feel it in her feet. The specific stillness of a car at rest, not the stillness of a car between floors. The doors opened. The space was concrete. Raw gray walls, unfinished, no plaster, no paint. The building's structural skeleton exposed the way it had been left in 1987, when the floor was sealed and built over. The ceiling above was low and uneven, the underside of the 8th floor's foundation slab. There were no windows. The only light was the pale ambient glow coming from the elevator behind her, falling in a rectangle onto the floor ahead. Scorch marks on the left wall were unmistakable, a spread of black and dark brown climbing the concrete, the shape that fire made when it moved fast and then stopped. 37 years of sealed air had not diminished them. Against the right wall, 2 sets of tools, a wooden-handled hammer and a folded measuring tape, placed close together with the neatness of objects set down by someone who expected to return to them. Beside them, a water bottle, empty, its plastic clouded with age. The smell was old smoke, not fresh, not sharp, but present, the way the memory of smoke stayed in concrete long after the source was gone. And underneath it, something else, not quite incense. The suggestion of it. The quality of air in a space where incense had been burned at some point, even if no sticks were visible now. Anchalee did not step out of the elevator. She stood at the threshold with the doors open and the concrete space in front of her, and she said the first name. Somchai. She said it clearly, at a normal volume, the way you said the name of someone in the same room as you who deserved to be addressed by it. A pause, then the second name. Decha. The same clarity, the same deliberate care. She said that she knew what had happened here, that 2 men had died in this building, and the building had been constructed around the absence, as if the absence were an architectural detail rather than a fact about 2 people. She said their names had not been in any record connected to this place and that she was going to change that. The air in the concrete space did not move. The tools against the wall did not move. Nothing changed that she could see or measure. But the elevator doors, which should have begun their automated close cycle after 30 seconds, stayed open. She counted 50 seconds, 60, a full minute of held open silence. Then, quietly and without drama, the doors closed. The car descended. The lobby reappeared around her. Anchalee stepped out and stood in the lit, ordinary space of the hotel lobby at 2:17 a.m. and began composing the report she was going to file in the morning. The report took 4 days to write, not because she lacked information. She had Kun Prasit's account, the elevator logs going back 14 years, the incident records with their 7 unmarked departures, and her own documented visit to the space between floors. She had everything she needed. What took time was the framing. A report about a ghost would be dismissed. A report about unexplained elevator behavior had already been dismissed. What she needed was a report about a specific institutional failure, the non-disclosure of 2 workplace deaths, the absence of any formal acknowledgement, the structural decision to erase a flaw from the building's numbering, and the recommendation that followed from that failure. She wrote it the way she wrote all her reports, factually, precisely, without interpretation beyond what the evidence supported. She included Kun Prasit's signed statement, which he had offered without being asked, his handwriting careful and deliberate on the page. She included the elevator logs with the floor 7 entries highlighted and time-stamped. She included the incident records with the 7 abandoned departures listed in chronological order alongside the corresponding log dates. The recommendations section was 1 page. She asked for 3 things: that the deaths of Somchai and Decha be formally recorded in the building's official history, with the date and circumstances, that a spirit house be commissioned, properly consecrated, and installed at the hotel's entrance, and that the 2 names be engraved on a plaque at its base. She submitted it to the ownership through the general manager's office. Kun Prayut did not respond for 6 days. When he did, he called her into his office and sat across from her with the report on his desk and his hands folded on top of it. He said the ownership had reviewed her submission. He said it raised significant historical and operational questions. He said the request for a spirit house installation was a personal matter that the company was not in a position to validate institutionally. Anchalee said that she understood his position. She also said that she would be submitting a copy of the report to the Department of Labor, Protection and Welfare, citing the unrecorded workplace fatalities of 1987 if the ownership declined to act within 30 days. Kun Prayut looked at her for a long moment. "Give me 3 weeks, he said. The spirit house arrived 6 later on a Wednesday morning. It was modest, a traditional peaked wooden structure, smaller than some, larger than many, installed on a low platform near the hotel's main entrance where the morning light reached it first. A monk from a temple 2 streets over came to perform the consecration, and 3 of the hotel's housekeeping staff stood with their hands pressed together during the ceremony without anyone asking them to. At the base of the platform, set into a panel of polished teak, a small plaque, 2 names, the year. A single line that read, "They built this place. They are remembered here." Anchalee had written the line herself. The ownership had approved it without suggesting changes. She was at the front desk on the Friday morning when the elevator logs came in showing a night with no floor 7 stops for the first time in any record she had access to. She noted it and filed it and went about the rest of her shift. At 9:40, a guest came down with his wheeled suitcase for checkout. He was a businessman from Chiang Rai, mid-50s, had been staying since Tuesday. She processed his checkout in the standard way. Key cards returned, payment confirmed, taxi arranged. He crossed the lobby toward the exit. He passed the Spirit House. He stopped. He stood in front of it for perhaps 15 seconds, looking at the plaque. Then he pressed his hands together and bowed once. Not deeply, not performatively, just the small and certain bow of someone who saw something that deserved acknowledgement and gave it. Then he went outside and got into his taxi and left. Anchalee watched from behind the desk and said nothing. She did not need to say anything. That was the point. The point of all of it. From the elevator log to the report to the two names on the plaque. The acknowledgement did not require an audience or an explanation or even a full understanding of why it was being made. It only required that, finally, it was.
If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.